Get this filth away from me.
You think you belong anywhere near these people?
Please, sir, I meant no harm.
You're not even worth the dirt on my shoes.
Look at him. Look at what he's wearing. Security, drag Billionaire.
In 24 hours, the most powerful man in this city will be on his knees. Not because someone beat him, because he never bothered to look. The roses were still wet. Dew clung to every petal like it was holding on for dear life. The sun hadn't fully risen yet, but the estate grounds were already buzzing. Caterers barking into earphones, florists arguing over centerpieces, security walking the perimeter like they were guarding a president. None of them noticed the man in the dirt. His name was Kade. He wore a faded green uniform, 2 sizes too big. His hands were rough, nails packed with soil. He moved slowly, deliberately, trimming each stem like it mattered more than anything else happening around him. No rush, no anxiety, just a man and his work. Nobody looked twice. That was exactly the point. The property belonged to Nolan Briggs. Real estate, private equity, media, the kind of man who owned things before most people knew those things existed. Tonight was his daughter's engagement party. A $1,000 per plate event filled with investors, politicians, and people who signed their names on things that changed other people's lives. Kade knew every inch of this property. He had studied it for 3 years. The head of operations, a compact man named Derek, stormed across the grass toward him. His collar was already damp. "You've been on the same flower bed for 40 minutes, Derek snapped. "Do you understand what tonight is? Do you understand who's coming?" Kade didn't look up. "These are Juliet roses. You rush them, they bruise." Bruised roses at an engagement party look like a bad omen. Derek blinked. "What?" "I'll be done in time." Kade finally looked up, calm. No apology in his eyes. "You have my word." Derek stared at him for a long moment, jaw tight, then walked away muttering something about firing everyone after tonight. An older groundskeeper named Roy shuffled over once Derek was gone. He handed Kade a water bottle and dropped his voice. "You shouldn't talk back to him like that, son. Men like Derek, they got small power and they squeeze it hard." Kade took a sip. "Small power breaks under pressure." Roy laughed, but it was a tired laugh. "You remind me of my boy. All that fire." He paused. "Just don't let it burn you." Kade didn't answer. He reached into the front pocket of his uniform and pulled out a worn notebook. The cover was falling apart, held together by a single rubber band. He didn't open it, just held it in his palm for a second, like a reminder. Inside that notebook were his father's words, his father's plans, his father's company, sketched out in careful, hopeful handwriting on pages that had yellowed with time. Nolan Briggs had stolen that company, not with a gun, with paperwork, with lawyers, with a smile at a dinner table right before he burned everything down. Kade's father never recovered. He died 2 years later, not from illness, not from an accident. From the weight of watching someone walk away with everything he built, while the world applauded. Kade put the notebook back in his pocket. He went back to trimming roses. By noon, the estate had transformed. White linen, tall candles, imported flower walls. The kind of event that looked effortless and cost a fortune. Kade worked the far end of the garden now, half hidden behind a hedgerow, watching the activity with quiet focus. His earpiece buzzed. "Phase 1 complete," a voice said. Clean, professional, American accented. "All secondary holdings are flagged. Waiting on your word." "Hold," Kade said softly. "Not yet." A beat of silence. "Understood." He pulled out his phone and checked the message chain. His team had been moving for 18 hours. 3 different legal firms. 2 offshore accounts frozen. A chain of shell companies that Nolan Briggs had buried so deep that even his own lawyers didn't know they existed. Kade knew. He knew because his father had documented everything before he died. Every meeting, every forged signature, every dollar that disappeared. The notebook wasn't just a memory. It was evidence. Around 2 in the afternoon, a fellow worker, a guy named Trey who ran the valet station, jogged over to Kade with wide eyes. "Bro, you went at Derek this morning. People are talking." Kade shrugged. "People talk. You don't understand, man. Briggs finds out some groundskeeper disrespected his operations lead. You'll be escorted off the property. This is his night. He doesn't play. Kade looked at him. Tonight is going to go exactly how it's supposed to go. Trey searched his face, waiting for a joke. None came. He walked away shaking his head. Kade reached into the deep pocket of his uniform jacket, the one most people missed, and his fingers found the second phone, the encrypted one, the one connected directly to his company's legal team in New York. He typed 2 words, "Stand ready." Nolan Briggs arrived at 4:30 in a convoy. 3 black SUVs, 6 personal security, a gray suit that probably cost more than most people's cars. He stepped onto the grass and immediately started scanning the grounds like an inspector, looking for anything that wasn't perfect. His eyes landed on Kade. Not because Kade did anything wrong, because Kade was still there. A man in dirty clothes, crouching near the imported flower arrangements. Briggs walked over. He didn't walk toward Kade. He walked at him, that specific stride powerful men use when they want to remind you of the distance between you. "Why is this man still out here?" Briggs said loudly, not to Kade, but to Derek, who was trailing behind him. "I said I want the grounds staff cleared before guests arrive." Derek went pale. "I'm sorry, sir, he's almost..." "Nobody asked you to explain." Briggs turned his gaze on Kade. "Get up." Kade stood. He didn't hurry. He rose the way a man rises when he has nowhere to be, slowly, without apology, brushing soil from his knee. Briggs looked him over like something found on the bottom of a shoe. "You're in the way." "I was finishing the arrangements," Kade said. "They're done now." Briggs took 1 step closer. "Do you know what I paid for this event?" "I don't." "Of course you don't." Briggs smirked, glancing at the 2 men flanking him. "Guys like you never do." He turned back to Kade with that particular smile rich men wear when they've already won. "Get him off my property." Kade didn't move. "The Tuscan rosemary near the East Terrace," Kade said calmly. "The pH in that soil is wrong. They'll be wilted before your first toast." Briggs stopped. "What did you say?" "Your florist planted imported rosemary in alkaline soil. It needs a 5.5 to 6-point range. You've got a 7, maybe 7.2 over there. By the time your guests sit down, those plants will look like they're dying." Briggs stared at him. Then he looked at his florist coordinator, a woman named Becca, who had gone completely still. Becca whispered, "He's right." The smirk faded from Briggs' face. "Not completely, but enough." "Fix it," he said to Becca without looking at her. He held Kade's gaze for 1 more second, something unreadable in his eyes, then turned and walked away. One of the security men shoved Kade's shoulder as he passed. Kade watched them go. Roy appeared beside him again. "You want to get fired, don't you?" "No," Kade said. "I want to stay exactly where I am." The earpiece buzzed again at 6:15. "We have a problem." Kade stepped behind the garden shed. "Talk." "Someone leaked the expansion file." A pause. "And your sister's location." "Briggs' men are at her campus." The world went quiet. Not the kind of quiet that brings peace. The kind that comes right before something breaks. "How?" Kade's voice was low. Almost no emotion. That made it worse. "Our chief security officer." Another pause. "Briggs bought him." The words landed like a punch Kade had been waiting for and still wasn't ready for. He'd hired that man himself. Trusted him with everything. The timeline, the legal files, the one thing he'd worked hardest to protect. His sister. Her name was Mia, 20 years old. Pre-med at a campus 2 hours away. She had no idea her brother was here tonight. She thought he was on a business trip. He had promised that she would never be touched by any of this. Who has her? Briggs' associate. Guy named Preston. He's got her in a building on the south side. He called it a conversation. Kade's jaw tightened. "Send backup now. If you leave the estate, the timeline collapses. The wire transfers need your biometric confirmation before midnight. If you miss that window..." "Send the backup," Kade said again. Quiet. Final. He walked out from behind the shed and headed toward the south side of the property. The building was an old storage unit, the kind estates use for off-season furniture. One flickering light, the smell of dust and old wood. They were waiting for him. Preston sat on an overturned crate like he owned it. 6 of Briggs' men stood in a loose circle, and Mia, hands zip-tied, seated on the ground, looked up when the door opened. When she saw Kade, her eyes filled. Kade looked at her once, just once, and his whole face changed. Preston stood up slowly, enjoying it. "The gardener," he said. "You actually showed up." "Let her go," Kade said. "No build-up. No negotiation." Preston laughed. "Man, you really don't know your place, do you?" He stepped forward. "We found documents on you. International investment portfolios. You want to tell me what a groundskeeper is doing carrying paperwork like that?" "That's not yours," Kade said. Preston hit him. It was hard, open-handed, across the jaw. Kade's head snapped sideways. He straightened, didn't make a sound. Mia flinched and looked away. "Next time you feel like playing spy," Preston said, crouching to meet Kade's eye level. "Remember, Nolan Briggs owns this city. He owns the judges. He owns the police. He owns whatever little game you thought you were running." Kade wiped the blood from his lip. "He signed the papers." Preston frowned. "What? Briggs?" "Tonight. He signed the acquisition papers." Kade's voice was completely flat. "That means it's already over." Preston looked at his men. One of them held up a phone. A notification had just come through on Kade's secondary device, which they'd taken. The man read it aloud. "Final signatures confirmed. Phase 2 locked." Preston's face broke into a wide grin. "Yeah, he signed them. That's us winning." He pointed at Kade. "That's you losing." Kade said nothing. He looked at Mia. She was watching him, scared but steady. She had their father's eyes. Kade nodded at her, slow, intentional. "I've got you." Then he looked back at Preston and said, quietly, "Take me to him." The VIP lounge was everything the garden wasn't. Dark marble floors, crystal lighting, the hum of expensive conversation. Briggs stood at the center of it all, champagne in hand, surrounded by investors and foreign delegates in tailored suits. When Derek shoved Kade through the door, every conversation stopped. 40 people, all staring at a bloodied man in a dirty groundskeeper uniform. Briggs turned slowly. "Derek." His voice was a blade wrapped in silk. "Explain this to me very carefully." Derek thrust the document forward, the one found in Kade's pocket. "Sir, this man isn't who he says he is. We found this on him. It's an international investment portfolio, the kind that moves 9 figures." Briggs took the document. "Read it." The color shifted in his face. He crossed the room and stood in front of Kade. "You're a spy." "Not a question." "I'm a gardener," Kade said. Briggs grabbed his collar. "Who sent you? Which firm? Was it Callaway? Was it the Hong Kong group?" He shook him. "You think you can come into my house and blow up my deal?" "I think," Kade said, "you should read the last page of the contract you signed tonight." Briggs released him, took a step back. "You want me to be scared of a contract I wrote?" "You didn't write it," Kade said. "You signed it." Briggs laughed. Loud, performed, meant for the room. He grabbed the signed acquisition file off the main table and held it up. "This right here? This is my ticket to dominating every emerging market on this continent. The anonymous founder of Global Meridian Capital agreed to sell me controlling interest tonight. Their representative is standing right there." He pointed to a delegate near the window, tall, impeccable suit, carefully neutral expression. "And you," Briggs said, turning back to Kade, "are a man with dirt under his fingernails who wandered into the wrong room." The room laughed. Nervous, relieved laughter. Kade looked at the delegate. The delegate looked at Kade. And then, in front of 40 witnesses, the delegate stepped forward, lowered his head and said, "Sir, you're injured." "I'm sorry. I didn't know they would." He stopped himself. Too late. The room went silent again. Briggs turned to the delegate slowly. "What did you just say?" The delegate's jaw tightened. He had broken cover without meaning to. He looked at Kade, an apology in his eyes, and then back at Briggs. I meant. He called me sir, Kade said calmly. Because I am. Briggs turned back to Kade. Something behind his eyes cracked. You're not. Read the last page, Kade said again. The name on the founding documents. The name attached to every holding in that contract. Briggs opened the file. His hands moved through the pages. Fast at first, then slower, then completely still. The room watched his face change. It started in his eyes. A flicker of confusion. Then disbelief. Then something that looked like vertigo. Like the floor was moving beneath him. His associate leaned over. Briggs, what's it say? Briggs didn't answer. The file slipped from his fingers and hit the floor. The last page faced up. The room could see it. Gold letterhead. Legal seal. And printed in clean, formal font beneath the founder's signature. Kade Allen, founder and CEO, Global Meridian Capital. Nobody moved. The delegate stepped to Kade's side and addressed the room in a clear voice. Global Meridian Capital holds $43 billion in managed assets across 16 markets. Mr. Allen built it from nothing over the last decade. The acquisition agreement signed tonight, which Mr. Briggs signed voluntarily, and in full, transfers ownership of all Briggs Group holdings, accounts, and affiliated companies to Global Meridian, effective immediately. Briggs sank. Not metaphorically. His knees gave out and he went down. Right there, in front of his investors, his guests, his future son-in-law's family. He hit the marble floor and stayed there. This isn't. His voice broke. You were gardening. You were in the dirt. Yes, Kade said. Why? Briggs looked up. His face was unrecognizable. All that power, stripped down to something small and shaking. Why didn't you could have done this from anywhere. You didn't have to. I needed you to show me who you really are, Kade said. Without the money, without the title, just you, and someone you thought had nothing. The room was completely still. You showed me. The door opened. Kade's team walked Mia through it. Wrists freed, face tear-stained, eyes searching until they found him. She crossed the room fast. Kade met her halfway and pulled her in. She pressed her face against his shoulder and he held the back of her head and closed his eyes. Nobody in that room said a word. After a long moment, Mia pulled back and looked at his face. The split lip, the bruising already forming at his jaw. She touched it gently. You didn't have to do it like this, she whispered. You could have just taken everything from a boardroom. I know, he said. Then why? He looked at her for a moment before he answered. Because Dad didn't lose in a boardroom. He lost in a room full of people who watched and said nothing. He glanced back at the silent crowd. I needed those same kind of people to see it this time. Mia's eyes filled again. He held her hand. Kade turned back to Briggs one final time. Briggs was still on the floor. Preston had been restrained near the door. Derek stood against the wall, not making eye contact with anyone. The foreign delegates were quietly gathering their things, offering small bows in Kade's direction as they moved toward the exit. 10 years ago, Kade said, you took a small company from a man who built it with his own hands. You did it legally. You knew his lawyers were outmatched and you went anyway. You humiliated him in front of people who respected him. He spent the next 2 years trying to rebuild, and then he stopped trying. Briggs stared at the floor. I watched my father put on a suit every day for a year and go meet with investors who already knew his name was finished because you made sure of it. He never told me how bad it was. I found out from the notebook he left me. Kade reached into his pocket. He set the worn notebook on the edge of the table, gently, almost like an offering. He wrote down everything, every meeting, every lie you told him, every signature you forged. Kade looked at it for 1 second. He also wrote about me, what he hoped I'd become. He paused. I think he'd be okay with tonight. Briggs had no words left. Kade straightened his uniform, still dirty, still torn, and walked toward the door with his sister beside him. The crowd parted, not out of obligation, out of something else entirely. Outside, The night air was cool and clean. A black car waited at the end of the walk. Kade opened the door for Mia. She got in, then looked up at him. "Is it over?" she asked. He looked back at the glowing windows of the estate, the same place he'd arrived at before sunrise, invisible, unnamed, carrying nothing but a pair of shears and 12 years of patience. "Yeah," he said. "It's over." He got in. The car pulled away, and the gardener who had spent the day in the dirt drove off into the dark. Not as a victim, not as a symbol, just as a son who kept his word. Some men build empires to be seen. Kade built his so that one day the right person would finally look, and realize too late they were already standing inside it.